some poetry doesn't just describe a moment, it survives it. And WL Gertz is here because he helped shape New York's underground poetry scene in the 1970s as co-founder of Dreams, which is a poetry and music magazine. But now, decades later, he's turning travel, memory, and history into haunting verse. In his two books, he has Land of Forgotten Fish and Broken Dreams. And so WL Gertz, he is all about the beats. So we're going to find out what the beats were all about as far as Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs. They're all about spontaneous writing, anti-materialism, Buddhism, Eastern philosophy, jazz rhythms, travel, urban life, and personal liberation. Sounds like a fun all around. So, Mr. W.L. Gertz, how the heck are you?
I'm great. Thanks. Very good.
Very nice. And so what did I leave out of that introduction? What are you all about? What currently has you so passionate and excited?
I think you pretty much nailed it. I'm a avid traveler, so wherever I go in the world, I try to read my poems or leave my books at local bookstores.
Cool.
I'm not new at this. I've been doing it my whole life, but I'm back on the scene after a 50-year hiatus.
Ooh, very nice. And I don't think any of us travel as much as we want to. And the stereotype with Americans is like so many of us don't have a passport or just remain in that radius around where we were born or grew up. And it's really sad. And travel really does expand the mind. But can you tell us about travel, like what it means to you, where you've been, where you've liked the most?
Yeah, I think basically travel is my life, and it was the impetus for all the poetry. So when I went to Europe 50 years ago, after I graduated from university, I was had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and then I went abroad, and I realized that there's a whole world out there that I would need to explore. So I've been traveling ever since. My other life, I'm a chairman of a educational travel company. So really the traveling and the writing was all connected. I went all over Europe in a backpack. I slept in hostels, cemeteries, any place I could sleep, and rode the trains really. So kind of, I didn't have a lot of money in those days, and I just kind of traveled around on eating and sleeping on the train. So, but I got to see all of Europe, so it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. And so, and there's like a stereotype from that era, right? Like they would call them hippies. Is that an okay thing to say, or is that
I,
derogatory? Or like,
I
what are your thoughts
no,
on like call them bums and things like that?
right. So definitely not bums. I think hippies. I would not have described myself as a hippie then, but of course I was one. It was in those days. It was being used by the administration to sort of make fun of people, and there was a big stereotype of people who were hippies, didn't have a job and didn't want to work, and basically were dirty. So there were a lot of stereotypes. But I think the late '60s was the best time in my life in terms of, exploring the world and listening to music, art, poetry. I mean, it all came together in that brief really less than 10-year period that really changed America in many ways.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a very pivotal time, and now we're here where it's like I don't even know what to make of the present day, right? Because there's still the class divide, and then there's kind of it's so easy to say like, oh well, kids don't appreciate art anymore, don't listen to music, but also like all the music is now accessible, so maybe it's like it is what you make of it. But I'm not sure. Like, what do you think about like what's happened since then?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous revival in a lot of ways of the music and the spirit of the 60s. I mean, it never really went away. It kind of went underground, to use the term. And I think I know there's one thing about the web and the internet. Everything is out there. So if you want to find the poems of Allen Ginsberg, or you want to see the roots of the beats, or read about the 50s, or read about the French surrealists, you can, because it's all out there and it's all free. So I think there's a lot more potential and a lot more places for people to read. There's TikTok, there's doing podcasts like this. So the world is open, and there's plenty of people that long for the days of freedom, and and are not just doing commercial things and working for hedge funds. So there's a world out there, and kids can find it. That'll be great. So I think that's good. And plus, there's so many people my age who have never forgotten. You never forget the best period of your life in terms of freedom. So there's just so many out there, so many revivals, and you can find it all on the web. All these, Facebook groups of, psychedelic music and all that kind of stuff. It's out there, and now with things like Substack, the writers can write for free, and people you can experience that. You can read stuff that you don't have to go in and buy a magazine for $6. So it's kind of an interesting period now. I'm pretty excited about it, and which is why I basically came back and just said, okay, a lot of stuff I did in the '60s, in the early '70s, I was young. I didn't know how to market myself at all. I mean, there was no such thing. So I'm older and wiser now, and I think it's a good time.
Yeah, it's there's something magical and cool about combining the old with the new, right? Like even like my
Mm.
phone on the desk here, like this glass, they invented it in the 1960s, like Gorilla Glass, right? And they said, well, we're gonna make this like bulletproof glass for cars, but like, oh, it's too expensive. But then just to do a little rectangle, hey, decades later, they found a new use for an old thing, and so it's like there's all and now it's applying to art and music, and it seems like the kids these days don't know how good they have it, do they? But we had to go to the
Yes,
library and the card catalog and order stuff from some
right.
other library. Now it's like it's instant. You get it in seconds. And so much has changed. And you mentioned in there a little bit about like the like when you're in like say the prime of your life or when you're in those exciting times. And I know you said like things like you backpack through Europe, but was there like a really like adventurous time or a really just great moment you feel like telling us about?
I mean, the moments remain. So things like I was at Woodstock in 1969. So getting rained on for 3 days and going through it, there was no food. The sound system was bad. But when you remember it, 55 years later, it's like an amazing time, right? So that's just one thing that's domestic. But traveling throughout Europe, sleeping in the parks and with a lifestyle that I could be on a train and look out the window, and if there was an interesting time, I could just jump off the train, when it stopped and find a hotel. You can't do that anymore. First and now in Europe everybody speaks English. So when I went 55 years ago, no one spoke English. You had phrase books. You had 25 different currencies. You didn't have a euro. So you had to really fend for yourself much more than you have to fend now. So, my point is that I went away a little boy and I came back a grown man. So that's the kind of thing, and that has inspired me to stay in the field of education and travel my entire life. So I love airports. I love getting on a plane. I'll go anywhere. I don't check bags ever. I take the same amount of clothes whether I'm going for 2 days or 2 months. It's just they have laundries in Europe, so.
Oh yeah.
But no, it's just many, many exciting moments through the years like that.
Very interesting. So there's something to be said about the scrappiness, and you figure that
Yeah,
like someone flying now, I mean, that can be in such a bad mood. Oh, I have to wait in this line, go to this weird airport. It's like it's fun. You're having these new
yeah.
experiences, and so when you were traveling and dealing with the phrase books, the languages, were there any scary moments? Like, did you get robbed, or did you ever fear for your life?
No, I would say no. I never got. I mean, I had more of that in New York City than I had abroad. As a New Yorker, there's plenty of scary moments there. But in Europe, I would say no. Nothing jumps out. Um, the world was different then. When you're 17 years old, you're not afraid. The older you get, the more afraid you are. And we also didn't have all this social media and media in general. So you didn't know what the hell was going on all over the world. You just thought you felt invulnerable. And I think kids today still do. They still feel invulnerable at that age.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. So we need to embrace our inner child because, like, if you're not careful, when you get into those adult years, you become dull and boring and scared and
Yeah,
rigid, and that's no fun at all. And so,
no.
like, you're reminding me that when the first time I left America, I was so afraid. I was like, I need to call the embassy. I need to like tell people where I am. But then when I got there, I felt safer than I did in America. And then coming back into America, the danger returned. Like I thought I was afraid to leave this safe place, the U.S. And it's like, well, the U.S. was scarier for me than these other countries. And so if someone is maybe like saying, okay, well, I know I need to like broaden my horizons, take the risk, go travel. Do you have any encouraging words of advice? Like if some say young person was like afraid to travel, what would you say?
I would say, first of all, I would say go now. This is your time. So it gets harder and harder the older you get. Of course, you have a job, you have a family. You can't wander around. It's hard to wander around when you're 60, 70 years old. It's easy when you're 18 and 19. I would say don't be afraid. People are people. You're going to find bad people and good people. So you need to develop street smarts, and I think as a New Yorker, of course, who rode the subways since he was 9 years old, I have street smarts, but you develop it when you're overseas and you have to do everything for yourself. Where are the trains? It's an incredible growth experience, much better than college or any other experience. Because and especially if you're on your own or you travel. I went over with four friends, but we ended up traveling independently. So I did a lot of traveling on my own. I love to be alone, actually. I love to travel by myself. I travel with my family a lot, but I travel by myself all the time. And you have to figure out where's your passport. Did I lose anything? There's all these challenges when you travel, but it's so good for you. When you've seen so much, you grow so much, and you're so much of a more intelligent person when you get home. You just, it soaks into your bloodstream. So I think that's really important.
Oh yeah, confidence and character builder. And I
Yeah,
think there was probably a time when I was afraid to go to the movies alone or go
yeah.
and like, eat a meal alone. And I think that's pretty relatable. And so you're saying go out there and toughen yourself up and have these travel experiences and develop your street smarts. And so you've taken these travels and then you like part of what you're all about is the art and the writing and the poetry. And so you've created these two amazing poetry books, and you say sometimes it's stream of consciousness comes from who knows what depths, so you're not even really sure what it means. But I mean, tell us about these poetry books you've created.
Yeah, well, a lot of it comes from my travels. So, when you travel, you meet a lot of people, especially if you travel on your own. So you meet people from all over the world, and you pick up a line or two, or feeling or two from everyone. So I kind of write a lot of interesting fantasy type things, like about being in Africa, where I've never been in Africa, but being in a war zone, just people trying to get through life on their own for the first time. So a lot of my experiences come through it in the poetry, which is part stream of consciousness and really part. I find the title before I find the poems. Sometimes a title just comes to me, and that title could be, I'm out of popcorn. That could be a title of a poem, and then I kind of write the poem, or I pull out a line from the poem, and that becomes the title. But I write a lot of stuff about what life is like. A lot of it's is not up. I would say I'm not an upbeat poet. I'm much more fatalistic, especially because the world is slowly falling apart, or maybe not so slowly falling apart. So I would say, but they're always interesting, and people get something out of it, and it makes you think and write your own poems. I mean, I wish everybody could just, have the luxury to do a lot of the stuff that I've done. But I am older, which gives you a lot more freedom. Also you can say what's on your mind easier. You have no one to worry about.
Oh yeah, yeah, and poetry is amazing, right? Because it's very like developed and worked on, and it's like says a lot in a short space, but then also kind of sometimes there's layers and makes you think. And so when you are like, you get inspired, you write down your poetry, you revise it, you figure out what goes in your book. Like, do you think is there good and bad poetry? Like, do you look to like get an emotion, or do you know when you see it, or like just what's the difference between good and bad poetry?
That's the eternal question. What's the difference between good? I mean, it's all in the opinion of the reader, right? So, for me, I don't like rhyming poetry. I don't like insipid poetry. I don't like obvious poetry. So my one thing with my poetry, it's not obvious. Like you read it and you go, "What the hell is this guy talking about?" But you never say, "Oh, I read this before." I've seen this
Sure.
before. I've seen this type of poem. I don't think so, because my style really hasn't changed in 50 years, which is interesting. I was always a little bizarre and surrealistic, and my writing has always been, like that. So it's hard for me to say. I mean, I put it if it's bad, and I think it's bad, and of course with the web now, there's just so much more poetry out there. So and there's so much more bad poetry out there, of course. But if it feels good, do it, and if you like the way it sounds, read it.
Nice. So there's that need for the self examination of it, and also you're still the same person. You're just older, different, more evolved. And so you've got these two books of poetry, and we said that they are Broken Dreams and Land of Forgotten Fish. So like, what are these all about? What makes them different?
Right. So first of all, they it's basically both two compilations of decades old poetry, and clearly delineated, and then newer poetry written in the last 2 years. So you can see it's so interesting, at least for me, to see that my style didn't change. I'm kind of the same person on the inside, obviously different on the outside. But the book is a collection of poems from the early days in the early 70s in New York, living in Manhattan and Soho and the Village, and just wandering around, and being in that period right before the punks came in, after the hippies. Kind of, there was kind of a little segue there, and then later stuff. So it's old stuff, it's later stuff. It's also a lot of stuff, manifestos. So they're kind of bizarre. We had a magazine back in the day called Dreams Magazine, which was which was manifestos, poems, literary criticism, rock and roll stuff. So it was really cool. So I put some of those in as well. So I think it's a really interesting read. I'm done with all the old stuff, so this will be my last book, which combines old and new. My next book for September will be all new, because one thing good about publishing is it makes you want to write. So if
Yeah.
you publish, you get it and you go, well, I got to keep writing. And I, again, I didn't write much, I would say, for a long time, but now I really want to write again. So I think it spurs you on to writing.
Yeah, it's like, do you ever miss a meal? Like you forget to eat lunch, and then when you eat your next meal, you're like, oh, I didn't realize how hungry I am, and I ate a little bit. Now I'm hungry for more. So maybe you got the writing itch back, and I'm excited for you and what you have
Uh-huh.
happening in the future. And it's fun to hear about the nostalgia, right? The 1970s, and especially like New York City as a location. It's such a character. Like sometimes I'll go on YouTube and I'll call up like a time lapse and just see like how it's evolved since like 1930s 1960s, and just the architecture. And it's just like seems like you've had so many fun experiences at home and abroad, and because you have these books of poetry, we can experience some of that with you in our own way, and just kind of hear about or learn about the beats, 1970s Europe, New York City, and so much more. And so if we wanted to check out those books, that's on Amazon, WL, last name Gertz, and that's Broken Dreams and Land of Forgotten Fish. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I also have a website, WLGertz.com. So there'll a little more information on the website. You can, and yeah, again, you can find me on my Facebook page, WL Gertz, Beat Poet. You'll find me on TikTok. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have a big following there, so I'm around. It's I do a lot of readings overseas. So I'll be coming to your town next, as they used to say. So I'll be doing one in Paris on July 15th, and I'll
Ooh.
be in New York and Connecticut. I live in Connecticut and New York, and when I'm not traveling, that's where you can find me. Amazon's the best place because the books are there. I've got a bunch of reviews. You can read about the poems. You can get a Kindle version, hardback, paperback. Yeah.
Very cool. So we can speaking of blending the old and the old we can see in person. We do your tour, but the new we can find out about you digitally. That's WLGERTZ.com to find those books, and you can find them all over social media. You mentioned TikTok, LinkedIn, etc. And in this conversation we're having, we've jumped around all sorts of different topics, but you're the star of the show. I want to make sure that we talk about what's important to you. So do you think there might be a missing question in our conversation that I should ask you, I just don't know to ask you?
I don't think so. I mean, the question is what's next for me, and what's next is I'm going to do more books. So I'm going to do a book a year, maybe more, but a book a year sounds about right for me now. And I'll be coming up with some very interesting concepts, really taking off on the world situation, the past, the present, nostalgia, modernity, which I'm not a big fan of modern times. There was a lot more cooler stuff, I think, going on in Paris in the, post and pre World War One than there is now. So,
Oh yeah.
and those, I like all these periods. So I like to read and I like to write. And so that's really no missing questions, just good conversation.
Very cool. Well, I love your ambition and the momentum that you're picking up. And as you said earlier, if it feels good, do it. So the
Yeah.
writing, expressing is feeling good for you. And so you say, hey, I'm making something of myself. I'm putting my words out there. And so that's WLGERTZ.com. And you're a poet, you're a man of many words. So I know this will be a easy question for you. I like to end these conversations by asking about a fun or interesting quote or lesson that has served the person. So does anything come to mind as far as a fun or interesting quote or lesson for you?
I mean, my favorite quote is a Bob Dylan quote which says, "Don't follow leaders, watch the parking meters," which means nothing, but it sounds incredibly cool. And a lot of times when I write something, it means nothing, but it sounds really cool.
Yeah, and then you never know if someone through from their own perspective they come up with their own meaning that you didn't even intend, but hey, it helped them. Got them to some kind of conclusion.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, funny stuff. Well, looking forward to seeing you on your book tour as well as online. That's WLGertz.com to find out about those two books, Broken Dreams and Land of Forgotten Fish, as well as those other books yet to be created. So, Mr. W.L. Gertz, it's been quite a fun conversation, kind of thinking about the past and travel and life and art and everything in between. So, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Robert.